never, never. It stopped here and now.
Society was created on this.
All of us are British, whatever colour we are.
We're all in this fight together.
Hello, I'm Hugh Woozencroft and welcome to Time for Change. It's a special broadcast where we're going to look at race in the United Kingdom. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests in the United States, which of course have spread here to the United Kingdom and across the world, race and inequality has been dominating the conversation. That's why we here at The Sun think this special panel debate can tackle some of those issues surrounding race and racism and also possible solutions moving forwards. Joining us, a fantastic panel for you. We'll begin from home, though, with the two-time heavyweight world champion, Anthony Joshua. Hello, Anthony.
Thank you for having me. It's an honour to be involved with such special people on this panel, so thank you for inviting me onto this panel.
Real pleasure to have you with us. Also here in the News UK building, Patrick Hutchinson, who shared a moment which I think many of us will remember with a white demonstrator during the Black Lives Matter protests, shared across the world. He helped carry an injured man out of the crowd to help him get to safety during those Black Lives Matter protests in London. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi, honoured to meet you, honoured to be on this panel with all you guys, and especially to meet Anthony.
Thanks. Katharine Birbalsingh, headmistress at the Michaela Community School in Brent, an author, an education reformer with more than 20 years' experience within the UK education system. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Stuart Lawrence, beside me, is a consultant, youth engagement specialist, a coach, a public speaker as well. His brother Stephen Lawrence was tragically murdered in a racially motivated attack in April of 1993. Stuart, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here.
And our final guest is broadcaster Trevor Phillips. He's also the former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Hello, Trevor.
Great pleasure to be here, thank you.
Over the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to cover a wide range of topics. Of course, the focus is on a time for change. We'll be talking about racism in sport, the role of education and policing, our general understanding as well of structural, systemic, or what we call institutional racism. That's going to play, I think, a part in everything that we discuss. But first of all, we're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement itself. Three dominant words over the social landscape in the United States and United Kingdom over the past 6 weeks or so. We're going to begin with a video message from Rowan Aiden.
Can you tell me what the Black Lives Matter movement means to you?
Patrick, why don't I start with you? What does it mean?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that I actually think the statement Black Lives Matter is almost like a insult to society because it's an obvious thing. Of course, Black Lives Matter. So the fact that we have to make that statement over and over again continuously says that there's an issue that we need to address. To me, it just means the community as a whole. And when I say community, I mean everybody who is against racism. I think that it means, as a whole, we need to come together and make sure that there is equality for everybody within our world, shall we say. So that's what it means to me.
Katharine, do you think the statement Black Lives Matter is needed in society at the moment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do. I think these last few weeks have given us the opportunity to do exactly what we're doing here, which is to talk about the issues, which is great. And I hope that over the next several months, we can have many conversations that will open up dialogue. I do think it's important not to alienate people because we all want to live in a society together where we can get on. And so it's important to discuss, and I hope that people will listen, really.
Would people be alienated by that statement, do you think, Stuart?
Hope not. You know, the whole analogy about your house on fire, I think that's the analogy that I like to talk to people about this one here, where at the moment it feels like even more so than ever that the Black Lives houses are on fire, and we really need to have the attention of everyone at the moment to ensure that going forward, I think the word that someone just said was equality. That's the word for me, key there of it all. Everyone just wants to know that whoever they are, whatever they look like, it's about what they say, how they act. The deeds of them is more important than anything else.
Trevor, former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, over the last, 5+ years, Black Lives Matter being a statement very popular in the United States and now spread across the world. Has that surprised you at all?
It hasn't surprised me, and one of the reasons it hasn't surprised me is that I might not look it, but I'm the youngest in my family. I'm the 10th of 10 kids, and most of my older siblings and my parents went to the United States 50 years ago, so I'm there a lot. I've got an older brother in Florida, and I went to visit him 2-3 years ago. I went out for a run in the morning. I mean, I don't, can't be like Anthony's physique, but, I do my best. I went out for a run in the morning, and he asked me, how did I get back to the house? And I told him the route, and he said, don't do that again. And I said, why? And he said, you ran across a guy's lawn, and down here, we have a law called stand your ground. You're trespassing on his land, and he can shoot you. And what you need to understand is, down here, they're not going to say, oh, harmless Brit, going back to his brother's house. They're going to say black man, and they're going to shoot you. So I think one of the things we need to understand why this is not just a kind of slogan that says something obvious. In the United States, it is a life and death matter. I don't think it's quite the same issue for us here, though I think there are some questions we've got to address. But I think people haven't quite got that it isn't just a matter of demonstrations. This is, certainly in the United States, a life and death matter.
Anthony, Black Lives Matter in the UK in the year 2020, why would you say it's so important that there is a message that Black Lives Matter?
I completely agree with what the panel is saying. And it matters because it's a slogan that has resonated with everyone across the world. This has been the world's largest movement as a whole, as a collective. So it's obviously resonated with everyone. And the 3 letters BLM, the slogan Black Lives Matter. And as we all are aware, equality is a conversation, and we're aware that all lives do matter. But right now, Black Lives Matter. And watching the film, the video where the police officer had his foot or his knee on George Floyd's neck, resonated passionately with so many people across the world, no matter if he was of a different race, of a different ethnicity. And they stood with the African Caribbean community to say that that can't be happening. And if it's happening in today's society, what else is happening behind closed doors? And that's why I feel that the Black Lives Matter slogan represents this movement so well.
It's interesting the point that Anthony makes about the reference to George Floyd's murder and the video of the police officer with the knee on his neck. Stuart, your family's had a particular experience that a lot of people, a lot of families may never go through when it comes to injustice, particularly relating to the police force. When you saw that video, what was your reaction to it?
So my first reaction was absolute utter shock. First of all, because I had my son sitting next to me, who's 9 years old, and I say to people as well, we need to be careful when we are showing these images of who else is around seeing them and the effect that it has on them, because I think they should come with a disclaimer, give some people a bit of time to maybe change the channel or to shield children from those sort of things. So that's the first thing I'd like to say about it, because I then had to have a conversation which I wasn't expecting to have with him at that age of 9. I thought that I may be able to, maybe secondary school, 10, 11, when he would maybe not be in the sort of parental fold so much and he would have to be experiencing bus journeys, etc., etc. So for me, it's another demonstration of power and control and how that can be taken to extremes. And we need to be really careful about who we allow to have that power and control and how we monitor them, how they're trained, how we review their training, how their outlooks of life outside of the jobs and roles that they have as well. I think that's really important to think about as well. And we just need to do better as a society to make sure that the people that do hold these offices, that we do have ways and means of holding them to account about their actions and the things that they do.
I just want to move to the next video question, if I may. It comes from Marilyn Devonish from Watford. Her question is,
do you think that this is going to mark a turning point in the conversation around race and racism and Black Lives Matter? Or do you think we're going to still be having this same conversation a year from now, 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 10 years from now.
Patrick, let me ask you, do you think this is a turning point, what we've seen over the last 6 weeks?
In a nutshell, yes. I do think we've hit a turning point. And it unfortunately took that tragic video of George Floyd, of his passing. I watched it and shed a tear when I watched it, and I've only watched it the one time. I could never watch it ever again. But yeah, there's been a lot of black individuals, men and women, across America and even in this country that have died at the hands of police. So George is not the only one, but it was his death that has, caused this paradigm shift. So definitely, I feel like there is, a real change coming, and we have to all continue to make sure that, these people haven't died in vain.
Time for change is what we're talking about today. Trevor, I think, people of a certain age would say there have been false dawns. There's been other incidents like this in the past that really should have brought it to our attention. I think I was born in '86. The first one I can remember is Rodney King, and I was a child, and I did see that, and I remember it being a massive news story. I remember being a child and watching documentaries and watching the news about the things that happened to your brother, and that was part of my childhood growing up here. I remember being told about the places that I could and couldn't go before I reached secondary school. Wow. I'm 33, so I don't think I'm even that old. People older than me, I'm sure, have very different stories. I wonder whether it will be a time for change, Trevor, just because if we didn't wake up before, why now?
Well, I think sometimes we forget that we should look back in history and think what it might have been like for our parents. And if we do look back, thinking about my parents who came here in 1950, those were the days when people could legally say, don't want you to live in this street. Now, nobody can do that today, and that is because people like my parents and Stuart's grandparents, actually, will have fought that battle and won that battle. But then every time you win one, there's further ones. And I would say that was probably true of the battle that Stuart Lawrence's family fought, which I don't like the language of turning points, but maybe we got to the battle that Stuart's family fought took us onto a new stage. It changed things. That doesn't mean we've solved all the problems, but it does mean things have moved on. And I think here, we probably will move on a little. And if I had to say what I think is changed in the last few months, it is that for a lot of people in this society who are not black, perhaps for the first time they've been able to walk a mile in our shoes in a way that they would not have bothered to or even thought was necessary a year ago. And now people know, for example, that we sit our kids down at 7 or 8 and give them what the Americans call the talk, how to behave in certain circumstances when you're faced with a police officer and so on. You need to be extra respectful. You need to keep your hands in view. You need to do this, this, and this. Now, most people don't have to do that. We do. But maybe what's now happening is that the rest of the world can see this part of life from the place that we see it. And I think that's got to be a good thing. In this country, people are willing to do that.
Katharine, do you predict this will lead to change?
Yeah, I think so. I think we see change already, really. And like Trevor was just saying, things have changed over the years. And I think about when I was growing up in school, I get called names. They'd talk about the PAKI shop. Normal, that was normal language going down to the corner shop. And if I was in the room, they'd say, oh, sorry, that type of thing. That sort of thing at school now, our children would never tolerate racism. It's the most grievous kind of crime, and they would be outraged. And that's really different to 30 years ago. So on the one hand, I think we have a lot to celebrate because I think Britain has come so far. And, we are all British, whatever colour we are. And so we should recognise that. But what's really exciting about this time is that we're also able now to have more discussions about what racism is. I found from my Twitter conversations that there are lots of people who don't really understand what racism is, actually. They just don't get it. And then they think that, you know, because they follow me, they say, but I follow a black person on Twitter, so I obviously can't be racist. And I just think, what? I mean, I have some genuinely bizarre conversations. So it's great that we're able to just get more information out there and discuss so that people can become more aware.
Our next topic, it's a big issue, I think, the role of racism in sport. In many ways, it's of quite a visual nature, isn't it? Sport, it ranks up there alongside media, for example. It tells us something wider about society in a way that I think other sectors can't, the likes of banking, retail, housing, whatever it might be, manufacturing. Sport, at the moment, has a very poor record. Recently, we saw one report that said just 3 of 139 board members, board positions held at the national governing bodies were held by people who were non-white. We're going to talk about racism in sport. We're going to talk about what can be done about that representation across the board as well. But since we've got one of the world's most recognisable athletes and sports people with us, our next question, of course, is for Anthony Joshua, and it comes from Brian Eastlake.
What do you guys think that should be done in the boxing industry to counteract racism?
It's a difficult question because I can only talk from my own personal experience. And boxing is honestly, I would love to tell you that there's massive issues. There may be. But it's such a diverse sport. It's not a sport where it's economically based or based on your gender or based on your race. Because in the gym, honestly, I'm amongst Africans, Caribbeans, Jewish, Asians, English, so many different mixtures of people. So it's a difficult one because I just felt when it came to boxing, I had no issues except for me breaking down my own doors. So I was never held back in boxing due to the colour of my skin. I was only held back due to my personal lack of motivation. So with boxing, I can't speak on things like that, but in other sports, maybe, there may be issues. In other fields of business, there may be other issues. But it's not a question of how do we make it better, it just has to stop. Across the board, in my opinion, it just has to stop. And these conversations, healthy conversations, are what will make a change because people will learn more and more about this subject and they'll educate their kids. And it's not even about me, it's about my son. It's about his friends learning from this subject.
You must have rubbed shoulders, though, with some pretty big figures in the world of sport. What do you think the main barrier is from translating great athletes on the track or in the ring, out on the pitch, to those board member roles I mentioned, great coaches, for example, managers, directors?
So with me, it's a situation, I can only speak on my experience. So when I came into the sport, I knew I didn't want to be a poster on someone's wall and someone saying, yeah, I own him, he's signed to me. So everything I wanted to do was a representation of ownership, because I think that's important to take your destiny in your own hands. And that kind of would lead me to my career after boxing, where I'm in control of what I want to achieve. So financial literature, economic literature, understanding accounts, legals, business conduct, being punctual is important. All these type of aspects will help me put myself in a managerial position. Having these conversations with you guys, I've had these conversations with my management team, 258, my promotional team, Matchroom, with my partners and sponsors. Everyone who is actually making change, even myself as a black man, I've put myself in a position. I know how many people I hire from one community and another community, etc. So I'm part of that group that's definitely been making change. So we're having these conversations as a collective now, all pushing towards a better future.
I'll throw this open to you guys. Are there any of you that think anything particularly strongly on translating athletes and the great performances we see from black and Asian people, in the Olympic Games, for example, into those board member positions? Do you see any barriers? And if there are any, how do you think we can alleviate them? Trevor?
What I loved about what Anthony just said, complete props respect to you is that it says, I mean, he's a big kahuna. I mean, nobody's going to be able to put on big events without Anthony Joshua, right? So he says, okay, you need me to make this event $100 million. By the way, when you put this event on, I want such and such on the team. I'm not going to be heading up an event which is run entirely by one group of people. I want to see diversity. And that is a fantastic, fantastic thing for somebody to be able to do. Because to be frank, black sports stars didn't do that in the past. Possibly the only one that you could say would have done that would have been the greatest person who ever lived, Muhammad Ali. And you can't apply the rules of Muhammad Ali to anybody else. Because he said, I'm the star, and I want things to be different. So I think a generation of sports people like Anthony are now not just making things good for themselves, but they're actually using their power to change things more widely. And I'd like to make just one other point about it, which anybody who watches football, one of the best things I think that's emerged in this country, certainly over the last 5-10 years, is to see young black footballers as pundits and analysts. And I've got to say, I feel a kind of pride when I watch somebody like Jermaine Genius, who's was a great footballer, but is also articulate, intelligent, capable of throwing the statistics, arguing the case of tactics and strategy with anybody. And I think for a young black person to see a young black man being that capable, that in charge, that in control, is an incredible role model.
Anthony, I'll come back to you because I hear you're looking at launching something in your own community to empower young people. Tell us more.
So I do believe that the mass gatherings, etc., are so important, because it spreads awareness, which is the Black Lives Matter movement right now, the slogan. That's the first part. And then the second part is what the organisation represents. But I stand for what the slogan means, so the mass movement. But I do believe charity starts at home. So I think that attacking our community, because I've had my own issues, and I understand that there are still issues. So I said, okay, I'm not someone that's going to, move from my council home and then automatically realise, I actually do like some garden space and some sun. I'm going to, bring people along with me. So I'm still really connected to my grassroots. So I went back to the community in conversations with the mayor, the councillor, and not so much asking for anything in particular, it's just for some guidance about what the community needs. And what I want to do is use my position, as Trevor was saying, as a sportsman with a big platform and a responsibility, is not only self-fund, which I think is important to put back into the community, but to unite and change the image, because, I don't want us to only be relevant when, number one, I'm knocking someone out, or number two, a police officer has his knee on someone's neck. I want us to have positive images that there are architects, there are entrepreneurs, there are doctors, lawyers, and valuable members of British society amongst the African Caribbean community. And it will make everyone feel comfortable, and I do believe it will move towards a better place.
How are we going to show young people that we have those great figures doing great things across the country?
How, did you ask?
Yeah, how?
Do you want me to reveal my master plan now? I have a plan, and I realised that at first I spread a lot of awareness on my platform, and it was a great conversation to have amongst people. And honestly, growing up where I grew up, I didn't really face one-on-one racism. I grew up in Meriden Estate, and it was all love. You might have seen the odd sign on the wall, but no one would ever do it to my face. But I've learned more about racism and systematic racism and injustice, because it wasn't really taught in school the way it should have been taught. I learned more in this period of time. So I'm more of a solutions man. I'm more someone who puts my mind down, takes time out, and I'll find a solution. And I honestly do believe, not only me, because this is nothing to do with me, the solution, it's a collective effort. And privately we'll discuss, and then at one stage it will be out to the wider audience. And it is all about a positive image, because I'm a loving man and love rules all.
Great message, Anthony. Thank you very much. Let's get to our next question. This time it comes from Arman Soltani.
Do you think there's been an increase or decrease in racism in sport over the last 20 years?
He's a big sports fan. Yeah, go on then, Stuart.
I think there has been an increase in certain aspects of it all. So, you know, it's only last year that we've had, you know, the Raheem Sterling, Adebayor's situation with bananas. So I think what happens is, this is what I think what Anthony was saying as well about the solutions to things as well. There's lots of people talking about things. We always do a lot of talking. It's about how do we take that talk into making it actually real things that people can see. And the way that Raheem Sterling came out and spoke about it gave everyone the insight that they needed to hear from his point of view of how he sees things. And that's really great that now that we have these platforms, Instagrams, Twitter, that someone can actually say exactly how they feel, unfiltered, without having to wait for any other news organisations to give them that platform to speak on. And for me, that's what's really empowering. So that's how we're going to ensure that the change and the solutions that we want to see will be able to happen.
Patrick, what do you think?
I would say that it's probably about the same. The only difference is that now it's unacceptable, or we don't accept it, whereas before it was acceptable. Some of the things that used to happen back in the day in football, for example. I look at today and I think to myself, how can a country have fans giving racial abuse to players on a pitch? And all that happens is they get like a few £1,000 fine. Where are the like £3 million fines and points deductions? Where's all that? Where's that? I mean, that would send a real message to these countries that this is unacceptable. And also, you know, back home you have some really talented footballers who have been decorated at the highest level, who have to be told that they have to go to the grassroots level to work their way up to management, where their white counterparts walk straight into top jobs. You know, how is that fair?
Trevor, what do you think?
Well, I'm old. I've been at it a long time. And I'm reflecting on the question. I'm thinking that when I was a teenager and a student, I've supported my football club, which is a blue club in West London. You can work it out for yourself. For now, I think, nearly 60 years. And I stopped going when I realised at that time, in the early 70s, you remember they used to throw darts? And I realised that I had become the bullseye in the shed end. And I stopped going. Now, that's not going to happen now. Then you had the bananas, and actually that's not going to happen now. But I do think what we do need to think about is what Patrick's talked about and what Anthony's talked about. How could it possibly be that if you think about football, a sport where 40% of the players are people of colour, but of the 20 managers in the top flight, just one is black, and it's very unlikely that that's ever going to climb above 1 or 2. There is something definitely wrong there. So I think the answer is not that there is more racism in the game. I think actually the fans are much better than they were. But the game itself now has to look into its heart and say, you know, are the black guys in the game just there for everybody's entertainment, or do they become leaders too?
Katharine, we've seen Black Lives Matter badges. We saw the words on the back of the shirts for the first round of games in the Premier League, but we've seen broadcasters wearing badges as well, and this week some decided that they weren't going to wear the badges anymore. Should they be taking them off? Do you think Black Lives Matter, just as a statement, has suddenly become too divisive with some of the things that have been said over the last week or so?
Well, what always worries me about these sorts of things is that people want to show themselves to not be racist. And so they put black boxes on Instagram, or they wear something and they say, look at me, I'm not a racist. And that's just weird, I think, because it's not really about whether you put a box on Instagram, it's about what you do and what kind of life you lead. I want to say to them, well, why don't you volunteer in a charity? Why don't you come and work in the inner city with young black people? Why don't you do something with your life where you're really going to make a difference. And so I don't want the stuff that signals. I want the stuff that does something.
We've seen a story this week as well regarding football commentators. It's a pretty small sample, but it did find that 6.59 times more likely to be talking about darker skin tone players when mentioning power, for example, 3.38 times more likely to be discussing speed when it comes to black players. 2/3 of all the comments from the football commentators across Europe that were looked at regarding the quality of play were about lighter skin tone of players. 67.57% of the negative comments were regarding darker skin toned players. You seem like a football fan.
No, as I said, yeah, 100%. And this is where this bores out my frustration, because I've done the grassroots thing. So I've done my level 1, I've done level 2, and it took me nearly 4 years to get onto my UEFA B. Now, I'm just a little old person who's trying to get through the system, and when I started to do a bit more digging, it comes from the top. It comes from the top. The board members, the FA board members, the diversity there, the age range there, the amount of men that are there. It's these sort of thing, and the key word that I'd like to use around these things is empathy. The only example I can give you is that I have a son, you know, my wife loves my son more than I will ever do, because that little person grew inside her belly, and that love that she has is so much different from the love that I have. And I love my son more than I love myself, but it's not the same. And it goes back to that word of empathy. You cannot truly understand something until you took a mile in that person's shoes, so to speak. And it comes back to that same thing. So unless we are doing things at the top, changing the way the top looks, we're always going to have these conversations. We're never going to be able to move on. It's been 27 years since that turning point from Stephen, and look where we are now. We're still having that conversation. And I've been saying, this conversation finishes with me. We make an end of it, we make the changes, we move forward, because I don't want ever my son to have to come on a panel like this, come on TV and talk about, oh yes, my dad and my grandma. Never, never. It stopped here and now. We are all adults. We are all in the position where we can say and do things to make these changes that needs to happen. Let's just do that now. Let's do it.
Anthony, Raheem Sterling of England and Manchester City made a point in December of 2018 about portrayal of athletes, how the sports media treated them differently, would report on them differently. Do you think that's still continuing, or was there a reaction in 2018 till now?
I can't say if it's still... I'm not in the media. I'm not too heavily involved in reading what the media say. But I do believe that as a collective of the majority of the African Caribbean players uniting together and changing the narrative. I just think that you can't depend on others to help. You have to do for self. But I think that an individual person trying to make a change is a lot more difficult than a union and a uniting people trying to make a change. A lot of these athletes, Raheem Sterling, myself, and many of his other colleagues have a massive platform to showcase a different image, a positive one. So if Raheem really wants to make a change, and I really want to make a positive change from an athlete's point of view and an ambassadorial point of view for the African Caribbean community, let us meet up, let us sit down and discuss how we can change the image from what Raheem might face as negative press.
Go ahead.
Can I just make a quick point? I mean, I think this issue about how people talk about different people it's important, but I just want to echo something that Katharine said. We just got to sometimes think about what's most important, really. It may not be that pleasant, but actually, in the end, you've got to think, what do you really want to deal with? And I'm just thinking in relation to what Anthony just said and something Stuart said. The truth of the matter is, there have always been great black boxers, and people talk about black boxers in all sorts of terms that you would not want people to talk about you or your brother or your father about. But on the other hand, Don King, who is quite possibly the most successful boxing promoter ever, and while he was there, was at the top of the sport, Don King couldn't give a two hoots what people said about him, because he called the shots. And in the end, I think for most people of colour, what is most important is not worrying too much about what everybody says about us, but do we get a chance to shine?
Well,
do we get a chance to do what we can do?
Well, this is the thing. You get a chance to shine on the field of play. I think from my experience talking to people in sport, the only issue with it is how people are described during their careers really strikes at the heart of building a perception of their character. When they leave the field of play, they might find it more difficult to get those opportunities on boards that we mentioned because they haven't been spoken about, particularly in leadership roles. We find that a lot with young English footballers, for example, often billed as the next club captain, the next England captain. Doesn't really happen in the same way it would to our young black English stars. I don't think I've ever heard Raheem Sterling or Marcus Rashford, despite the great work they've done, described as the future England captain, and they're in the team at the moment.
So can I jump in there?
Go on, Anthony.
Quickly. So from a point of view is, we mentioned that, athletes that make the transition from the field to the business room, I think you said there was maybe 3 people of ethnic backgrounds that
of 139.
Yeah, so now we ask the question, how come they're not getting the same opportunities, etc. Then I ask the question is, now you look at the representation of who is managing these athletes and who they're, the competition is in the management. And it's the same situation that will it go to the left or will it go to the right? And that's where we have to take ownership. And that's what I said when I made sure when I came into the sport, no one would take ownership of me. I have to control my own destiny, to control my own narrative. It's about ownership.
Katharine, you had a point.
Well, no, I was going to say that it's not just in sport. Of course, the top 100 FTSE companies, there's no black CEO. Over half of them don't have a black board member. This is a problem elsewhere. And I'm not quite sure what we do about it, to be honest. It's a really difficult one because, as I was saying earlier, we do need to win hearts and minds, and we need to work, black people and white people need to work together. On the other hand, what Anthony's saying makes sense when he says, well, we've got to take control and we've got to kind of move ahead ourselves. But that isn't always possible. And I suppose all we can do is try and make people more aware by having conversations like these.
I think that point takes us nicely on to our next topic, the role of education. We need to enhance minds, you say. Well, it's pretty important. It's been said a lot over the past few weeks. People just need to be better educated. I've heard that hundreds of times on issues of race, slavery, white privilege, and the ways in which minority groups are discriminated against, which I think we've already touched on. It's not just an issue affecting race, though, is it? We're going to start by getting another question from the public.
How can we change the national curriculum so that it gives our children a better and broader education on black history and race issues?
Katharine, I think this one is for you with your experience in education. What do you think?
Yeah, well, education is complex, and the reason why children don't know lots of things is more to do, I would say, with the poor behaviour in schools and some of the poor teaching methods. People just assume that the teacher stands at the front of the class and that the children's desks are in rows and they're looking at their teacher. That isn't what goes on. And in too many classrooms, there is chaos. And so people talk about what's on the curriculum. But I keep saying, look, if the children are jumping out the window, it doesn't matter what's on the curriculum. And it's so important that we get our schools back under control. And I'm telling you, I've been saying it for years. I spent my whole life trying to reform education. And, I'm in school every day at 6:30 a.m. I love my kids. And this is coming from a place of love, because too often people think, oh, how can I be critical of the education system? I'm not being critical of teachers. It's the system. And this is why I was saying earlier to everyone here, come and visit our school and you will see such order and you will see hardworking children. Because as Anthony was saying, what we need is for children of all colours to be well educated, taking responsibility for their lives so that they can move on ahead and do something. And too often our schools don't allow that to happen. You talk about the curriculum. The fact is, I've never seen a history textbook that doesn't teach slavery, civil rights in America, colonialism. Certainly at our school, we teach about India and Gandhi and the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya. We teach slavery, we teach the whole of North America and all about civil rights. Now, our children will remember this stuff, but that's because we teach with a focus on memory. The teaching methods that are used in our schools are just not good enough. And when I say that, I know I'm saying something controversial, but I promise you, I'm saying it with love because I want what's right for our kids. And if we did that, you see, all this other stuff about Black history, it would just happen because the children would remember what they learn. But you've got these poor teachers in front of the classroom desperately trying to get the kids' attention. Silence, can I have silence, please? And the children aren't with them. We teach personal responsibility, we teach duty, we teach a sense of honor so that you can be proud of yourself. Anthony, everything he was saying just now, I was thinking, yeah, take responsibility and do something. But you can't do that if you don't have a good education. And that is why schools are so responsible for doing that for children and allowing them to change their stars.
You speak about your particular school and experience, which is in the borough that I'm from, Brent. I went to a school in Hammersmith and Fulham, which was a state school, but I don't remember our classes being that crazy and wild, I've got to be honest with you. Eton, for example, major public schools in this country, I imagine they're quite orderly in terms of how they teach their students. They're not your average school. Do you think those institutions are giving their children the right kind of education on things like slavery and Black history, Black British history, in fact?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by that. So I certainly think that they would be teaching about slavery and civil rights and colonialism. If you want more than that, then you need to think, well, what are we going to leave out? Because there's only so much room in the curriculum. I think it's important that we teach British history. So what I mean by that is all of us are British, whatever color we are. And it's important that we all have the right to be able to access that history and to feel as if we belong to our country. So we sing God Save the Queen and Jerusalem and I Vow to Thee My Country with our children who are a variety, ethnic backgrounds. And we do that because if you don't feel like you belong to your country, if you feel like the establishment is against you, even if the establishment is against you, if you feel like that, you will find it very hard to succeed. And I think it's important for schools to instill a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in one's country, in children. Now, one can then be critical of the country, of course, but you need to feel like you belong. And I think too many schools fail at doing that.
Just quickly, I just want to push you on that. Britain's colonial history, the British Empire, major part of British history. That would make a lot of people from my community, Caribbean community, not feel overly happy with Britain's part in that. I suppose people from Africa, from Asia might feel the same way. You wouldn't teach that to young children, is that what you're saying? I just wanted to clarify.
No, absolutely. I'm saying not, I mean, we do.
Okay.
We teach all of that. And the history books tend to, the history textbooks, I mean, obviously I can't speak for most schools, but what I'm saying is that in terms of assemblies, in terms of the culture in schools, you want to create one where everyone will feel like they belong. If the Black children feel like they don't belong, they will find it harder in life to be able to succeed, because if you feel like the establishment is against you all the time, then it's hard to motivate yourself. And so it's important for schools to instill that sense of belonging, and I feel that they fail to do so.
You mentioned your young son a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm a school teaching background as well, and your school sounds amazing, and you sound amazing for what you're doing for your kids, but what there is a disparity. There isn't 100 of head teachers like you out there.
Well, that's very kind.
That's what the problem is, and when you speak about Eton and schools like that, they're charities, so therefore they dictate their own curriculum, they dictate what they teach and how they teach it. So we need to find a way to get into the system so that they have to teach certain things and they have to highlight certain things. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and if we then go back to the reason why kids have to go to school, the reason why they make them do things is to jump through a hoop called the education system, exams. That's what it's for. So therefore, we need to look at the exams that they're sitting. That's what we need to go to. We need to talk to the exams departments and these exam organisations and say to them, what are you doing to ensure that what we've got to teach the kids is a breadth of everything? You know, there's GCSE history, but kids can't go out there and pick the history they want to do, which doesn't make no sense in my head. And even at A levels, you can't say, I now have the skill set to be a great historian and I want to research this subject and then present the information I go back to the exam board to show them that I understand and know this subject. Why can't we do that? then that gives everyone from every different background an opportunity to deep dive into their own cultural history and their own cultural past.
Trevor, what do you think? Bit of a shake of the head there.
Well, well, first of all, I think one's got to be a bit fairer to what schools are currently doing. I mean, just it happens, for example, in relation to Eton. Eton does a thing every year with a friend of mine and somebody Katharine knows, called Tony Sewell, where he takes a whole bunch of black boys and girls who want to get into medicine and science, and they do a series of projects with Eton schoolboys, which are in that sort of area, and they work with the university. I went to Imperial College, and so actually Eton is getting the full dose of blackness pretty regularly. So also, I can tell you that, to be honest, a lot of schools now do cover these issues. I happen to know that. I have a niece who goes to school in a very white part of the country, and she asked me 3 months ago, we've read about what you said about multiculturalism in our textbook, and we have to write an essay on it. Tell me what you think. So schools are trying to tackle these things. What I think may be more important for me, and that may be because I grew up in the Caribbean, or I went to school in the Caribbean rather, and you know, all the head teachers and all the teachers were Katharine Birbalsingh, is the fact that the figures of authority in our school system, by and large, are not black. By and large, they're not people of colour. And if I had a criticism of where we are in the school system, it's less the curriculum, but it is more what you see and feel every day as you go into school about who really matters, who really gives instruction, who gives... And I would say, if schools have a problem to solve, it's that rather than what's in the school books.
Stuart, you just want to come back on that.
But as a representation of black people, there's 3% of us in the country. So how are we, as a representation of 3%, going to represent all the great schools in this great nation? It's not going to be possible. And that's my point where I'm saying to you, it's about what school's for. It's not about educating kids to grow up and be individuals to contribute back to society. That's not what we go to school for. As a teacher, for the 17 years I've been teaching, that happens at form time, citizenship, PHSE. That's where I talk to kids about life, which is an hour once every 2 weeks or 15 minutes every single day. That's where we talk about life. The rest of it is, how do I get this kid to go through this hoop of GCSE English? How do I make sure they go through, they get the best grade possible, so that means their possibilities are better outcomes? That's what school's for.
I don't disagree with that, Stuart, but the numbers aren't quite that. 1 in 6 people in this country is a person of colour. It would be possible and reasonable for every school to have a reasonably serious senior person who is a person of colour.
But not 1 in 6 people want to be teachers, though.
And it's, pardon?
But not 1 in 6 people want to be teachers.
Well, no, but all I'm saying is... All I'm saying is...
I don't feel like we could use that as a steer to say we get more ethnic minorities to be teachers and that's going to solve the problem. It's not. Because if the system and if what they're teaching isn't diverse in itself, if that teacher's just a teacher and has no say about what they're teaching, then we're going to still have the problem that we're having now. And that's what I'm saying to you. It's got to come somewhere from the crescending of the top that then filters down. That means that in everyone's society understands that everyone, doesn't matter the colour of your skin, doesn't matter what you look like, as long as you contribute and give something good back to society and you want to be a good person, then you're accepted.
Well, we're not disagreeing. No. I think both things ought to be true. Yeah. And all I'm saying is, actually, all I can tell you is that I think quite a lot of schools actually do this already.
Patrick, what are your...
I was just going to say, I'd like to add, when I was at school, I returned to when I was at school and I learned about, I've said this on many occasions, Tudors and the Stuarts and King Henry VIII and Samuel Pepys and Oliver Cromwell and all these people. I never learned about anybody that looked like me. And that was a problem for me growing up. I struggled to understand. I used to say to myself, where are the people that look like me? I learned about the world wars. There were black people in the world wars, but none of it is documented in schools.
Well, what I would say is, you and I are of a certain age.
Yeah.
And things have changed.
It's very different now.
It really is very different. And it used to be the case that history was whitewashed, and that was very wrong. And so the million Indian soldiers that gave their lives and the hundreds of thousands of Caribbean soldiers in the world wars were never talked about. And black people, we've had to fight for a monument for many years in order for that to be recognized. But that isn't the case anymore. It is the case that the history that's taught is not whitewashed. But I would go back to my point that there is just, there's too much disruption, and there isn't enough real learning going on, with memory being the focus of the teaching methods.
Anthony, what do you make of it, the national curriculum, this topic about teachers being more diverse? What do you think strikes to the heart of the problem?
I just want to say, like, not everything I say is going to be the gospel. It's only my opinion, and as I'm forever learning, that will change with time. So you just have to bear with me. But I always like to find a solution. So I love the discussion, but I love the solution as a collective. And it seems that this is such a vast discussion to kind of pinpoint it down to one thing.
Anthony, thank you. Let's move on briefly to our next question. The debate over statues. They've become very, very important in the country over the last few weeks. But would removing statues be to lie about our history? That's what the Prime Minister has suggested. Patrick, if we got rid of some of these statues, like they did in Bristol of Edward Colston, would that be a good thing?
Yes. Anybody that benefited from slavery in a huge way, and if they're being celebrated for it, then yes, I think those statues shouldn't remain. Other individuals, I think there should be a conversation. You know, with the wider public, you can't just, you know, go down ripping down statues all over the place, but there needs to be a conversation about other individuals. But as far as I'm concerned, anybody that benefited from slavery off the back of my ancestors and is lauded for it, then I don't want to see their statues anywhere where I am in, that's for sure.
What do you think, Stuart?
I'm sort of flippy-flappy with this one a bit, because just simply because I do believe if we attack the problem or talk about the problem from the top, and we get people from government. We talked about representation earlier on as well. Representation from our local government at the moment, top cabinet. There is no black person in the top cabinet. So that's where I'm saying we need to be at the table to have those conversations. And then once we start to talk about it at those top tables, I do believe the right things will be done, and we won't need to get bogged down on we've got to have a panel to discuss about which statue should come down, which road days. That's just a side distraction as far as I'm concerned. If we talk about the problem, which is equality, black equality for everyone, for every black person, we look at that as a pinnacle point, then everything else will then get itself sorted along the way. That's my personal opinion on that.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly different to you, just thinking about what Katharine said a little bit earlier on about wanting to feel a part of your society and your country.
Definitely.
And the idea of, you know, someone being celebrated who was a major part of the transatlantic slave trade, for me, feels a bit wrong. But to be honest, before that had happened, it wasn't something that I'd massively thought about, mainly because I don't go around inspecting statues. But people in Bristol, they had already said that they didn't want his statue there. That was something that was on the table and was already being debated. Katharine, do you think it would make someone who disagrees, like Patrick, feel unwanted?
Yeah, I can understand that, and I think it's important to have the conversation. I mean, I'm a headmistress, so I'd always be telling our children not to go around tearing down statues. I think it's something that we need to talk about. You know, I used to be of the opinion that various statues in America should come down, let's say of Robert E. Lee, the Confederate statues, because of what they said, and in particular because they'd been put up in the Jim Crow era to tell black people that they should know their place and that the whites were in charge. And I'm not so sure now, mainly because, you know, Patrick, for instance, was saying, well, if they were a slaver, then they should be taken down, but other people we need to discuss. The thing is that where do you draw the line? Yeah, what man is without sin? And the thing is, I'm not defending, you know, Colston, obviously, but it's very hard to make that decision on who stays and who goes. And I suppose I've come to the conclusion that I think, because I'm a great believer in education, it'd be good to have a plaque next to these statues explaining their histories and what the person did and what was admired then and so on and why they're there. It would allow us all to learn something, actually. If we just take them down, and I know that, you know, in New Delhi, they took down the statues of the British generals there, and in in Eastern Europe, they took down various statues of Lenin and Stalin and so on in Russia, and they put these in statue parks. So they didn't just get rid of them. So there is that option of statue parks. I just think it's very difficult to decide who goes and who stays, which is why I think I've come to the conclusion that plaques are the best way forward.
Exactly, as I think a lot of campaigners in Bristol did as well. They wanted a plaque truly explaining Colston's role in the city. Trevor, what do you think? Should we be removing some of these statues? And importantly, what the Prime Minister said, if we remove them, would we be lying about our history? For me, I think if we need to be open about our history, then we'd do something like Katharine has suggested.
Yeah, I'm somewhere around that. To be honest, I would never want the whole statue thing to become an excuse for people saying, look, we pulled down the statue, stalled racism. Actually, the things we've been talking about are a million times more important than, as you say, most of us walk past these things. We've got no idea what they're there for. But I do think, if you're going to get into debate about it, I would say that it's got to be a meaningful act, and it's got to be widely discussed, and the debate is actually the most important thing. And also, what leans me slightly against pulling them down is that I don't want people to forget. I want people to remember what these guys did. And my slight concern is you remove them from the landscape and everybody will say, yeah, but we'll teach. But actually, no 6-year-old is ever going to ask, what did that man do if that statue's never there? And I'm kind of with you. Explanations is the more important thing. And the only other point I'd make about it is if we're going to do this kind of stuff, we've got to be consistent. Colston may have been a bad guy, without question, but actually he did whatever every butcher, baker and candlestick maker in Bristol did at his time. And I think if we sort of pretend that transatlantic slavery was just about some particularly nasty individuals, if you get rid of them, that's fine. What we're not telling our children is that the society was created on this, and we're making it just a kind of, oh, there were some bad people who did a few bad things, rather than the monstrous crime that transatlantic slavery was in this society. And it means that, for example, people don't want to touch, for example, the statues of the former Prime Minister Gladstone. Now, Gladstone's family was actually the biggest slave owner in the empire. They owned probably my ancestors. Yet somehow, because Gladstone was nice to some people here, we're sort of forgetting what he did. So I think we've got to be consistent if we're going to get into this statute thing. Either pull them down or just leave them alone and tell people what they're about.
Trevor, thank you. We're going to move on to our next topic. Next topic is policing, of course. Massive, just in terms of what we've seen happen to George Floyd in the United States. There are people that think, particularly in the United States, that the police should be given less funds, should be reformed, for example. And we've seen lots of stories come out from the United Kingdom as well off the back of that, of people saying, look, the police forces here, they're not massively different, as extreme as that video was. Let's go to our next campaign. It comes from Kirsty Wright.
Hi, so my question is, do you have faith in the British policing system, or do you think that prejudice still exists?
Stuart, I'm looking at you for this one.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a difficult one for you to answer, but let me know.
100%. Because my point of view is slightly jaded more than anyone else's, definitely. But I always say to people, it took one good copper to do something that made a massive impact into my brother's case. And I always have to be mindful of that, to say they're not all bad. There is a few good ones in there. I spoke to a police officer today, and he was saying that there's, in the force at the moment, there's a sort of feeling where it almost feels like he's gone back to the 1980s, he said. And that's a young, oh, it's not young, he's older than me, but a black officer that's working in the Met Place today. So that's why I'm always cautious to say, oh no, we've all changed, we've gone forward, because I've always got to remember that there's always going to be this systemic institutional racism that's inside the Met, that will always be in the Met, while we keep on doing the same sort of things and the same sort of training and the same sort of people are in there.
Patrick, what do you think?
Well, I'll take you back to that fateful day of June the 13th. The reasons my friends and I went down there in the first place is because of our lack of, trust in the actual policing system, and we thought we needed to go down there ourselves and help, be overseers of our, young children, stop them from getting themselves into any trouble, and make sure they were just demonstrating. That particular incident that had me, pictured the world over, there were many police officers there, but most of them seemed to have GoPros filming everything. Now, they could have jumped in there and stopped that from happening, but they were more interested, I think, in filming everything and using facial recognition, and then going back later on afterwards, probably convicting everybody. There's no real policing going on, So that's what I would say about the police, and we don't, and also the police. Black people, get a raw deal when it comes to policing, especially in America, but here too. I think, we need to be protected and served as well. And I think they forget that message, that they're there to protect and serve us as a community as a whole. Not just black people, white people too, but obviously we're the ones that always seem to, get the raw end of the stick.
Patrick, talking about disproportionate effects for the BAME community, do you think there is a big problem with policing towards the BAME community? Trevor, I'll ask you. You should have some experience working with them.
Well, there's no question that there is still a major issue for some of the police forces. But I would just preface everything by saying anybody who says there's not been any change basically isn't looking at what's happened. And also, if I may say so, in Stuart's presence, would massively be disrespecting both the work that his family did and its impact, which has been profound in this country. And I think people who say, oh, it's all as bad as it was, just need to think what it was like, not before Stephen died, but before the Lawrence family sort of alerted to the British public to what had gone on. I mean, that was profound, and it has changed things. Now, it hasn't changed things to the place where I think most of us would like it to be, and I think that leads us to a separate point, which is when we talk about institutional racism, everybody can have a kind of argument about it. One of the things we need to remember is that institutional racism is not about the cops just being full of bad people. It is what Stuart talked about, the habits, the memory, the practice, the way people doing things the way things always are. Yeah. And the person who coined the phrase institutional racism said, what it means is the cops could be full of a choir of angels, but because they do things in a particular way, the result would still be the same. And that's really what I think one has to be focusing on. Some changes happen, but there's still a lot more to do.
Anthony, you must speak to a lot of young people. We've spoken about the Met before, but I'm sure you speak to them all over the world and certainly all over this country. Do you think younger people lack trust in the police?
I think that, if a younger person was in trouble and they can't get through to their cousin or brother, the next person or their mother, they're going to call the police. So there is a trust, but then there is a distrust because you see the videos of a police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck. So there becomes a massive distrust. And what we spoke about earlier is that there is no censorship. So regardless if you're trying to turn your kid's head away, he or she might go to their bedroom at night and watch it on their iPad, and that just creates a sense of distrust. This is a topic that I couldn't say that I don't know the solution to, because when you're put in a position of power, it just depends how you use it. So this is a situation where your true feelings are going to come to pass, because once you're put in a position of power, it's difficult to tell someone to kind of control themselves. So it's a really difficult topic now. Hugh, it would just be interesting how, with so many different discussions, how do you conclude this issue? And how, that's what I would love to discuss with the panel, is how do we find a conclusion and a solution for this topic?
A conclusion, Katharine.
The other thing I'd like to add is that I think the reviews within the police force, so like you have these reviews, they need to be independent, because I think if the reviews are outside of the police force, I think the behaviour would probably change. Everything seems to be within the institution, which is obviously racist. So, have these reviews, have independent people review what's happened, and then maybe some of the behaviours would change.
There is the IPCC, though. You're nodding.
But you see, you're right, because they're still retired police officers that are there. And for me, there's a couple of things that a lot of people don't know. So, for instance, local police are not from the local area. I teach in my local area. Parents can see me at the local shops. Kids see me at the local shops. So therefore, I'm visible, I'm seen. Whereas these police officers, some of the police officers that work in, say, Catford, don't live in Catford. So they come in, they do their job, and they leave again. So no one ever sees them again. So that sense of responsibility, I think, needs to come in with the police, where we are helping our local community. We're Bobby and the local Bobby, that sort of... I'm looking after these kids because they go to school with my kids as well. So there's that sense of community that we need to get back with the police. I think would be really important.
Katharine, criminal justice reform, is that a big part of this?
Well, I think a big thing is that we want to get more young black people to join the police force, and it's something that I strongly encourage at school, because the more black police officers there are, the more trust we'll build. I mean, obviously there are problems with the police, but I have to say that, in all my 20 years working in different schools, there are police officers who I've had to dealing with issues and so on. There's always a police officer that's connected to the school. And they've always been brilliant, they've done a great job. So, there are some brilliant police officers and there are some who aren't. And I think over time, if we can get more and more ethnic minorities involved in the police, we're onto a good thing.
And you also, sometimes you've got to remember, you can't calculate for sheer stupidity. I mean, stopping a man in his late 50s, me, in a car, looking for somebody who's, the description is a black man in his 20s, is not racism, that's just stupidity. Sometimes you've got to be a bit careful.
Doesn't that strike to a bit of a community disconnect? Because I can name you, any number of black people who've been stopped by the police.
I know. I'm just saying...
And linked to a crime based on their appearance, that of course we would say, well, I look nothing like that person, I don't fit that description, but there does seem to be a bit of community disconnect, where even you are mistaken for someone in their 20s, Trevor.
I'm happy to be mistaken for someone in my 20s. Well, my point is just a simple one, that we need to focus on the things that go wrong. And you can do some practical things. In New York, the introduction of body-worn cameras doesn't solve everything. It hasn't solved everything, and people turn them off and all that. But it has changed the behaviour of the New York cops over the last 10 to 12 years. So there are things that we can do if we just have the will to get on and do them.
Let's go to our final topic then. Thank you guys for being with us. We're almost there. We're going to talk about solutions to these problems, something Anthony's been keen to stress all the way along. This is your section, May. We're going to, listen, I personally think for long-term change, it's all about individual responsibility as well. We can have a wide-ranging conversation, but ultimately, if we reach people that want to make individual changes in their families, in their work life, then that, I think, can spread some change, and it all starts at home. Let's begin with a question from someone more well-known than some of our other questionees. The well-known British TV presenter Trisha Goddard. She's been the victim herself of racism at many points throughout a 40-year career in media. Have a listen to what she's had to say.
It's a big question, what happens after this initial wave of Black Lives Matter. Is it going to disappear off into hashtag history, or do we build on it?
Anthony, I want to come to you to begin with Trisha's question there. Is this going to be long-term change, or will it be a hashtag moment in history?
It has to build. I think it's interesting because I feel like we're in a, times the presence, and let's say 300 years from now, when none of us are here anymore, there's going to be everlasting change. All the efforts that we're putting in today will definitely create a change. Whether it turns into a hashtag or not, this moment will never be forgotten, and it will spark the interest of someone. Now, I think today's solution is standing against racism, and racism doesn't mean that everyone from a certain ethnic background is part of that system and benefits from that system. I know white kids that are struggling around the corner as well as Asian kids. So it's not just black kids that are struggling. It's a class thing as well. And then, once you move out of the class issue, the thing that separates a lot of African Caribbeans is no matter if you're Hindu, Buddha, Christian, Muslim, the colour of your skin stays the same. So we are all judged on that. And so I think the images that we need to represent are important. So I believe in the African Caribbean enterprise where you, as I said, the athletes have the biggest platforms. The same way I rally for Under Armour, the same way I rally for Range Rover is the same way I should rally for the African Caribbean community. Then you have a self-sufficient fund where, you know, leading people in the African Caribbean community invest back into assets, invest back into businesses that generate a yield, that, you know, their initial investment is still safe. The return can go back into supporting grassroots charities, and we showcase all of the grassroots charities, what they're doing. We honour these people, and every 6 months to every year, we have an African Caribbean community gathering, which is inclusive of everyone, and everybody comes together. And it just shows that, oh, hang on a minute, that person that I had an opinion of is actually a valuable member to British society. And I think that's all the African Caribbean community is asking for, is just to be, you know, looked at as valuable members of society, not to a point of view where, as I keep on referring to, what sparked this conversation is, where someone feels comfortable enough to have a camera in their face and still feel there'll be no repercussions if I put my knee on this man's neck until he passes out.
Trevor, I'll come to you next. You know, as I said a little bit earlier on, there have been moments in the past that I think a lot of people would have sat back and said, there must now be change, and it hasn't necessarily happened. Do you see this as a different moment?
Well, I think it's a moment in a series of moments, and you know, we shouldn't get into the frame of mind of thinking if everything that we always wanted to happen doesn't happen in the next 3 months, then it's all been pointless. I don't think it's like that at all. I think the important thing is this is another stage in a struggle that people have been carrying out, certainly through my lifetime, through my parents' lifetime, and so on. And actually, it's a step forward. I mean, I think that the big step forward in this country on this topic is that people aren't embarrassed to talk about race. I mean, for the whole of my adult life, I mean, I'm not a race relations, well, I'm a scientist, but I spend a lot of time in public writing and talking about it. And most of the time, people are a bit embarrassed. They don't really want to talk about this issue. I think this period is changing that. And I hope that what will happen is that when somebody brings up some of these issues, nobody is going to sit in a room and say, well, don't be so sensitive. Why are you all so obsessed with race? Why are you playing the race card? I hope this will take us past that. And what I think will really make a change, I mean, there are lots of things we talked about that could make a change, but what I really, really want to see is in buildings like the one we're sitting in, that there's no room where the decisions, the really serious decisions are made, where everybody sitting in the room is white. What will make a difference, and I know this, is when one of us is sitting in the room, the decision and the conversation are different. And that's what the next stage of making things work is going to be about, making sure that everybody has a voice at the table.
Katharine, do you agree? Is that one of the main ways we can build on this?
Well, of course, I'm a headmistress, so I believe that the best thing for all of us is education. And I believe in education reform. I want our children to be taught well in our schools so that they can all, whatever their colour, be able to make something of their lives. And Anthony mentioned class. I love the stuff that Anthony was just saying. And I love the idea of children being able to take personal responsibility for their own lives, however difficult it is and however many obstacles there are in front of them. We will all know here just how obstacles can make us stronger and how we can, every cloud has a silver lining. And I think it's important that we view life like that. We try and live a good life. We try and help others, pull them up with us as we go, so that we can look back when we're older, when we're on our deathbeds, and say, I contributed, I did something. And that's what I try and inspire in the children, and all my teachers do. And I think that's where we need to begin, is with our schools. Patrick,
what do you think? How do we build on this time?
I agree with Katharine that the children are the future. If we
should write a song about that.
If we change, you know, the way that children see our society and the way that things may be happening in some of the households, and they grow up and, you know, without racism, because let's remember it's learnt behaviour, right? No one is born a racism, as they say. You pick it up from either your home life or society. Society as a whole has been, disproportionately, racist to black people. So if you're growing up and you're white, you may feel that you're slightly better than a black person. Not your fault. It's just that that's the way society has been. So I think if we do start with the children, eventually we will get to a place where there is equality across the board for everybody.
Stuart, you were nodding throughout.
Yeah, I agree with everyone what says. So there's some key things, though. I always say to people, first things first, this fight is my fight, it's not my son's fight. I really want to make sure that in the rest of the time that I have here on this earth, that I'm dedicating myself to this, to seeing real change. And like everyone says about the time for it, so I know that it's not going to happen overnight. I know this is not a year or 2 years. This may be 10 years, this may be 15 or 20 years of my life that I'm saying that this is what we've got to do. And I'm willing to do that because I want to make sure that when my son is my age, this conversation isn't a thing. He just gets on with life, and we're in that utopia place that I believe that we can get to. But again, it's going to take education, the people behind us, some of the people in front of us in age as well, they might be ready for that change as well. But if not, let's make sure all the people that are younger than us understand and know this, that life is for everyone. It doesn't matter the colour of your skin, it's about what you do and how you contribute to the world. That's what's most important.
And Anthony, time for change, I guess that's what we're calling for here. Do you have a message for the people of the United Kingdom and how you think they might be able to help change our society?
I was just thinking, I couldn't say this message is the right message, and there's a million messages that I listen to, but I was just thinking, right, is this message that the African Caribbean community are trying to spread is just wanting to be better, which is valuable members to British society, pay our taxes, support the NHS, support education. So when you really look at that situation, as we know, all lives matter, but right now, Black Lives Matter are calling for help, is if I was sitting in a different household from a different country, take me out of my body and put me in a different person, and I was listening to the black community and what the panel have been speaking about today, I say, you know what? I respect what they're trying to achieve, because they're just asking to be valued in society, to be looked at for their talents and what they're trying to add to society. They're not asking to be better or take away from what society's given. They just want to add. So, you know what? Next time I see, someone of the African Caribbean community, I might put my thumb up or give them a nod and say, I respect your battle, because we're all in this fight together.
Thank you very much indeed. And that brings us to the end of Time to Change. Thank you very much to everyone who's been with us for this, and especially our panel, Anthony Joshua, Patrick Hutchinson, Katharine Birbalsingh, Stuart Lawrence and Trevor Phillips. Thank you very much indeed. I've been Hugh Woozencroft. Goodbye.